Hello and welcome to the Thursday process. Thank you for joining us. It's 11:30 Eastern or some other time wherever you hail from. Uh, Nate and I are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. We like to start at about 11:32 Eastern on this webinar just to give people time to trickle in. So if you need to grab a pen, paper, refill your coffee, something like that, go ahead and do it. We'll be getting started right at 11:32. Nate, you got snow where you're at?
Yeah, we got started getting snow yesterday in the morning, and we've got probably about 3-4 inches on the ground right now. So more
Walter sent
coming
me
the
a
next
photo, and
3 days. So we'll have more.
Walter sent me a photo of his front yard, and there's about 6 inches. And he said, "Yeah, there's two more that's coming down right now."
Yeah, yeah.
Not missing Michigan today.
Well, we've had to be fair, we've had a pretty dismal winter from a snow perspective. Like, I have a Siberian Husky, so ski joring and having him pull me when I'm on cross country skis is something that we do. Is just kind of our winter activity, and not
Nope.
enough to do anything. Like, not even getting close. So
Well, for those of you who are just joining us, thank you for popping in. We're going to get started in just a minute's time. If you want to grab a cup of coffee, get that pen and paper, now's the time. We'll get started right at 11:32. Just letting people trickle into the session before we get started. All right. So 11:32. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Ian Richardson from Richardson and Richardson Consulting, and you are on the Thursday Process, an entrepreneurial process-oriented webinar that dives deep. And today we're going to be talking about sales process. A quick disclaimer here at the top: presentations on Thursday Process are intended for educational purposes only. These presentations should not replace independent professional advice or your own personal judgment. Statements of facts and opinions expressed are those of the participants individually. They don't represent the opinion or position of their employers or certifying bodies, governmental agencies, whatever. Nothing presented here should be considered legal or financial advice, especially not legal or financial advice. And you may be watching this on demand. Today is January 26, 2023. It's 11:32 Eastern. Nothing in this presentation will be updated from today. So if you're watching this at a later date, just recognize that the content has been static. Quick little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. There are polls that happen during Thursday Process. They're going to pop up on your screen. Please, please, please answer them. Those polls are what gear the content. So this quarter's content's already been locked up. We've got a great session and a great series. Go to thursdayprocess.com if you want to see that. But the polls and the answers you give me are what I go out and recruit for guests. So I appreciate you guys answering them. Please go ahead and do so. If you have questions, there's the Q&A at the top. Go ahead and throw out the question. We'll answer them live throughout the webinar. We'll stitch them in. We also have 5 minutes near the end to handle any final ones, but don't hold them back. Ask as many as you want. That's what the session's for. And there's a download for you. If you click the handout section, you can grab the internally used R&R sales process. You'll notice it references some other documents. We are diving deep into this, and we'll spend a little bit of time today talking about the series that Nate and I are doing around sales process. So this isn't the last Thursday process on here. The webinar is recorded. So if you do have to leave a little bit early, it is recorded. That recording on demand will be published within a day or two of today, and it will end up on the R&R website next month. So without any further ado, let's dive in. Again, I'm Ian Richardson. I owned and operated an MSP for 16 years before selling it, and co-founding Richardson and Richardson with my wife and business partner, Carrie. And I'm joined by my good friend, Nate Tutas. Nate is the head of partner success, and he's a 15-year sales veteran who's regarded as an expert in sales process, and strategy. As the head of partner success at Membrain.com, Nate works with some of the top sales consultants across the globe to fulfill Membrain's mission of elevating the sales profession. Having worked with hundreds of companies across 17 countries to implement CRM, process, and embedded training, Nate's got a pretty unique skill set when it comes to getting the most from your technology, and I can attest, just like myself, he's a process nerd. So, speaking of process and nerding out, Nate, you got a lot of books in the background there. What are you reading right now?
My current choice is a book called The New Structure of Magic: Patterns for Problem Solving by Dr. Richard Bandler, who's the co-founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP. So deep into linguistic process and how you actually solve problems. So
awesome. That's going to be a fun one. I recently started rereading the Ellipsis Manual, which that's like a modern day Machiavellian approach towards body language. That's the only way to describe that book. It can be used for good or for evil.
I'd say I'm gonna have to pick that one up. That sounds like it's right up my alley.
So. It's meaty. It's meaty. So for those of you who are watching, we're going to be walking through the R&R internal sales process, but today is a little bit different because I want to highlight some very, very key pieces around process and how you can use it to help support and enable not only yourself, but any sort of sales resources, whether it's sales admins and sales engineers, account managers on your team for better success. So we are going to dive a little bit deeper into each of the sections on this and kind of talk about how you can use process and any sort of software to make your life a little bit better. And so without further ado, if you're following along in the document, I'm just on the process outline piece, which really, if you look at this, the R&R sales process has 7 big steps, but it's divided into 5 stages. And those stages are the marketing handoff, discovery, value proposition, close the deal, and operations handoff. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of start with the beginning and the end of the process, which are those handoffs, which is something I see ignored again and again and again. There's a lot of noise in the space about sales versus marketing, sales and marketing, etc. Nate, talk to me about when something's bubbling up in your world and across your career over at Membrain, and it bubbles up from marketing, and now it's a sales thing. How does that handoff occur? How important is that handoff in your world?
Oh, it's essential. It's absolutely essential. And it's essential from kind of 2 perspectives. One is making sure from a sales perspective that whatever that lead is, that opportunity that came from marketing, is qualified to actually go into the pipeline and be worked on. Because many times there's certain things that are flags that as salespeople, we see that we got a lead in from marketing. We're like, great, a warm body, someone I can talk to. I can get them on the phone and start a conversation. But had you actually gone through and looked at what some of those flags were, if you had those qualifiers documented, you would actually be able to give constructive feedback to marketing saying, hey, great job attracting these individuals and creating these leads and opportunities, but they're not the right fit for us from a customer perspective. So maybe they're outside of your ICP. Maybe they're too big or too small, depending on where you work within the market. There's various different variables like that if you document it and you have it as part of a process, you can notate that. And then you can make sure that you're not wasting time on missed opportunities, or on opportunities that are going to be a waste of time because either when you close them, it's going to be a poor customer relationship, or the likelihood of you closing them just based on win rate percentages is so low because of whatever those variables might be. So it's hugely, hugely important.
Yeah, and I want to highlight a couple of things there. First, for those of you who didn't recognize the acronym ICP, TCP, target client profile, ideal client profile, ideal customer profile, choose your TLA there. But that concept of wasted time is so important. And I think we, like this particular audience, especially with managed service providers, recognizes that. So most of us all use ticketing systems, time tracking systems. We're tracking the time of our engineers. If you're a time material shop, hey, that's what you bill. And if you're a fixed fee shop, we all get it, right? That the less time we spend on something, the better off we are. That that opportunity to maximize your engineers' time and get them to do as much billable work in that 8 hour day as possible is huge. One of the areas that we ignore is sales time, and that's cost of opportunity, the cost of acquisition of that customer. If your sales guys only have 8 hours a day, and if they're not doing any internal work at all they're doing is hunting for new logos. Well, if you're giving them 100 leads a month and 50 of those leads are a waste of time, and it takes them an hour per lead to get that thing down to, oh, hey, this shouldn't have been in here at all. Well, you've burned 50 hours of time. That's a whole week. That's a week and a day and a partial day worth of time that you've wasted doing stuff where they could have been going out and prospecting for better leads or doing follow-ups or any number of things that would have been more useful than talking to someone who they had no business talking to. So that's just a huge point. And so when it comes to the end of the funnel and doing a handoff, Nate, like this was another area that really bubbled up is thinking about including the last step of my sales process is the start of a delivery process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's seamless that, hey, at the end of this process, here's what this handoff is. Do you how can you make it easy in a process to make sure that the ball doesn't get dropped, that information flows? And this was one of my favorite things about Membrain, and disclosure to everyone on the call. I use Membrain internally at R&R. Membrain's our CRM and our sales management tool, really, our sales process automation tool that we use. But how can you make sure in a process to make sure that, like, hey, you're at the end, what's next, right? That's the key question is what's next, and make sure that the ball isn't dropped, there isn't a communication misfire. Talk about that and talk about how impactful that can be.
Yeah, so one major part of that is actually just documenting it, right? So having those specific steps documented, because there's so many times, I used to work in a construction field, and there were so many times that we would have drawings, we would go through building out the entire plan, and as the salesperson, myself and the estimator would know exactly what needed to go into that job because we had worked with that job intimately for a while. But then when we passed it off to construction, there would be a missing pieces of information where they'd come back later and ask one of us about it and be like, hey, did you know that the drops needed to be 18 inches instead of 12 inches? And we're like, yeah, didn't we write that on the document? And it's like, no. And the team is already in the field, right? So that could create huge issues. And luckily, we solved a lot of those really quickly, but we had to learn to document what those steps were. So one of the nice things that you can do when you have a tool that actually helps you to document what those steps are is you can actually make sure you can have them be check boxes that you just check off to say, yep, we talked about this, we talked about that. You can have places for notes throughout the entire process that capture the pertinent information so that it's all there when that handoff occurs. You can also assign steps to specific individuals to go in and make sure that they review the information that's in there and make sure that they're taking that forward into the next project from whatever that project might be from a delivery perspective. The other thing that it does, and I think the main thing, it's great that we get those processes set up so that they work internally from a company perspective and we don't miss anything. But if you think about the customer experience, I think we've all had times where we go through a process with a salesperson of some sort, they close the sale, we get handed off to the next person, and we feel like we have to re-describe every single pain, every single challenge, every single thing of, hey, this is what we're trying to solve for. And we're thinking in our heads, I just spent however long explaining that to the salesperson. Why am I having to regurgitate this? You guys don't seem like you're all that well connected. So when you have that process documented and there's a seamless transition, the experience for the customer is elevated tenfold from that perspective.
Yeah, and that's such a key differentiator these days. In IT, I was seeing this right before I sold my MSP, which is just 2 years ago, really, or a year ago in a month. I sold it December of 21. one of the big differentiators we were able to do was around customer experience. Because I mean, sure, we know whatever technology, right? We know security, we know this backup thing, we know Azure or the cloud or whatever, and so does everyone else. But one of the ways we were able to differentiate was a seamless customer experience and making sure that the customer felt valued and the customer felt heard, and that became the differentiator, and it allowed us to raise prices fairly routinely up until we were a cost leader in our market when I stepped out of the organization, and that was because of an excellent customer experience. And that starts, like, the first impression someone has with your organization is in sales.
Yeah.
And there's not really anyone more qualified in the organization outside of a sales professional to dig deep and find out what's bothering someone, find out what those pains are. And so if you can inform your team, if your help desk knows on day 2 of support, hey, this thing has been giving them issues for 3 months, and this is what caused them to fire their old guys. So if you see something around this, treat it like it's a heart attack.
Mm.
Because they're super sensitive to it and they need it fixed, and the fix is 2 weeks out. So if issues come up, just fix them right away, so that we're not agitating an already agitated state, right? You're setting your team up for success with that documentation and that handoff.
Yep. On the other component piece that comes into play with that as well is if we look at, like, right now we're talking about the sales process of the actual pipeline, but if we look at the process of growing an existing account, when you have that smooth transition, you have that smooth handoff, and you have points throughout the growth process that help to enhance that customer experience, you can make part of that process a request for referrals. And when you talk about raising prices or asking for a high margin or whatever, and the referral that you get is, hey, why did you work with them? It's because of the experience. It's because they're 10 times better than everybody else. Membrain itself, we've gotten sales because there's CRM platforms out there that when you talk to other providers, when you talk to other customers, they'll say, yeah, the thing that I hated about that technology provider is after they sold it, they disappeared. We never heard from them again. The thing that I love about Membrain is you're always there. You don't go away. You're always there to support us. You're always, you're helping us from an onboarding, from customer training, that sort of thing. So that in and of itself, I can just say, having been a sales rep, has won me opportunities just based off of being able to document that customer experience and have that reference point. So even that can be huge as far as just, one, closing the sale and giving the customer a great experience, but then how you leverage that to continue growing your business moving forward is also huge.
Yeah, you can always just revisit those pain points. Hey, Nate, last time we spoke, you had mentioned that XYZ was an issue, and I see that on that issue, 1, 2, 3 has been done. How's XYZ today?
Mm-hmm.
And man, are you closing the loop there? That could be 6 or 9 months down the road, and you're remembering something from that far ago, and maybe it's been solved for that many months. And what did you just do? You just gave them an opportunity to be happy with you. Oh yeah, no, you guys knocked that out of the park.
Yep.
Or, you know what? Everything's fixed except for this one issue. Well, tell me about that, and let's go get that fixed. You're giving the ability to do that last 5 to 10% when you have that really good handoff from sales to, for lack of a better term here, account management. When you're putting it into the customer success, the customer relationship, not just your tech team, but also your account manager team, who might be a different person than the person who goes out and closes the deal. That handoff and being able to close the loop on anything they've brought up, big or small, forms rabid fans, and that leads to referrals.
Yep.
So second stage, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time here, so much so, in fact, that next month, at the end of February, the last Thursday in February, we're dedicating a whole session to it, is discovery. And I will tell you that I'm never going to say 100%, but 99% of the sales that I lost were because this guy screwed up discovery. This guy right here, I messed it up. I botched it. I didn't do something. I skipped the bases, which I'll talk about in a second. But discovery's like the silver bullet in sales, and I have a brand saying that there is no silver bullet. So that's a big statement for me to make. Nate, walk us. Why don't we define it first? What's a discovery anyways?
Yeah, so discovery is really it's kind of a couple of different things put together, but really it's understanding what the customer needs, not just what they're presenting as the problem that they have, because many times the initial problem they present isn't always the actual isn't actually the problem, right? So it's really understanding and being able to dig deep and ask questions and helping the customer to actually walk through that process themselves, helping the customer to actually figure out, okay, I've never actually thought about, if I don't solve this problem, how much is it actually costing me on a day to day, week to week, month to month basis for me to continue ignoring this, right? That can help to shorten your sales cycle, because all of a sudden the customer goes from, it's a nagging issue, to this is costing me tens of thousands of dollars a day. It's a major problem. I need to fix it. The other component is the way you differentiate yourself as a salesperson is being the one who, I like to refer to it as kind of sitting in the pocket, right? If you've ever watched MMA or boxing or something like that, they'll talk about how a really good fighter can just sit in the pocket and kind of bob and weave and miss shots and that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden up comes that hook or that uppercut or whatever it is. Having that ability to do that as a sales rep is what sets you apart and gets customers going, you know what? When I was talking to Ian, it was different. He didn't just run through a quick script and try to rush me through the sales process. He actually helped to slow me down and ask questions that I hadn't thought of myself. But because of Ian's expertise, he knew to ask those questions and elicit that information so that he had a better understanding of what it was that my real problem was, so that he could provide a real solution versus just rushing through it and then going, oh, hey, I think we have this and it'll solve the problem. And the customer's never connected the dots on anything. So they're going, I don't agree. I'm going to keep looking, or I need to think about this longer, or whatever that might be. Discovery is that time that you really have to actually expand and go as deep as possible and really drill down into that issue that the customer has, so that not only do you fully understand it, but they feel like you actually understand it, which is one of the bigger components.
100% agree. What I found from marketing efforts, you get, there's always that lead that's referred over to you, right? And you're starting 3 steps up the ladder already, because someone they know, like, and trust has said, "Hey, I know, like, and trust this company. Here's been the impacts on my business. Here's how it changed my world. What you're saying is there." So they almost perform a full rapid sales cycle for you when they're having that conversation and you're not in the room
Mm-hmm.
and you've been referred in. So there's this basis of trust, which could be off of assumptions, and those assumptions could be radically wrong
Yep.
with that referral, but it's usually a little bit faster and easier to get the referral to close. You're talking about a marketing generated lead. Usually in the IT space, at least, there's rarely a greenfield opportunity, someone who just doesn't have IT and is looking for it. They usually have a provider, and either something bad happened and they're pissed off, they had a price increase and they're not seeing value, or there's a new leader and they're evaluating for due diligence,
Yep.
and they bubble up to you. And so you've got to be able to understand what's important to that person to be able to make that connection. And I love the expansion of issues. So there's just a massive amount of value and power in asking the right question to the right group of people at the right time to spark the right conversation, which leads to the right breakthrough. And those breakthroughs are the value of discovery. And rarely is it you. I mean, everyone on here is an IT professional. Chances are within 5 to 10 minutes of talking to someone, you already in the back of your head, because you've done this 1,000 times. Now, yeah, they need this, this, and this. But they don't know that they need that, that, and that. And so when you ask those questions and get and create awareness through questions and through that consideration, they're starting to say, yeah, no, we need to fix this, whatever, because it's costing us this much money in payroll that we're losing, and we're missing the opportunities to bid, which our average value is this. So there's some opportunity cost there. And then we're starting to have existing customers get frustrated because we're spending so much time over here. These customers are getting ignored, and that's creating some churn. So revenue is actually decreasing. Like, there's all different types of things. And if you're targeting growth organizations and they're trending underneath their growth goal, well, that's shareholder return. That's a whole different type of cost. And so If you're exploring and expanding on 3, 4, 5 different types of costs with people around each issue and stitching those together and letting them say, well, yeah, this is what it's costing me. This is what that impact is. Okay, well, now I understand. So your impact is X, Y, Z, one, two, three. Did I hear that right? Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. You've helped them quantify those problems in your, you've helped them quantify those problems throughout your discovery and really set the stage for success. So, another big part of discovery outside of like exploring what's going on, and you touched on this, Nate, is also like where do they want to be,
Hmm.
right? If we define, hey, where I'm at, this is my current state. One of my favorite parts of discovery is, well, what do you want to have happen? Like, why did you call me? What's the point? Like you called me, you said hey, or you agreed to the meeting. Why did you want to talk to me? Talk to
Yep.
me about how you discover future state and how you can use that to create a highlight of what's commonly known as the gap.
Yeah, and perfect word there, because many times, like, the discovery conversation, if we want to boil it down to like its base function, it's a gap analysis. That's all it is, right? But many times salespeople don't actually translate it and think of it as a gap analysis. So I use some terms that we have from NLP, which is present state, desired future state, and then before after bridge is what we call it. So where are they now? Where is it they want to get to? And then my solution is that bridge that helps them to actually bridge the gap between where they are now and where they want to get to. Right. So the way I usually do that is I'll capture some initial information about where they are today, what it is that they're at, what problems they feel like they're dealing with. And then I'll say, okay, great. So if we were to just kind of take a step back, and let's say it was 12 months from now, and you and I were sat across the table at a Starbucks having a cup of coffee, and the conversation started off something like, holy crap, Nate, that was the best 12 months we've had in our business as it relates to whatever particular issue you're looking to solve for them. What would actually have to happen for that conversation to be taking place? And at that point, they start describing what their future state looks like 12 months from now, and what would have to take place, and what revenue increase they would have, what efficiency increases they would have, what, if they're having issues and they're having constant challenges from an IT perspective, what things need to be taken care of. And it's a great question, because at that point, as the service provider, you can just be noting down, okay, so I need to solve for this, I need to solve for that. And then I always like to stop and say, okay, that's great. You dig deeper. You say, what else would you need? What else would you need? What else you need? And then you say, okay, so what's stopping you from having that today? And that brings them back to that kind of present moment of, well, this is a challenge. That's a challenge. We're struggling here. We're struggling there. And then you can start having that additional conversation, asking those additional questions to dive deeper and deeper into those areas, figure out what timeline do they need that solved within. Hey, is this an issue just for you, or is it happening for others within your company or your department? Does this have a roll up effect? If you're trying to get this approved by someone in your organization, what's important to them? Why do you think they haven't stepped in and tried to solve this before? I mean, you can really dig deep into a lot of those areas and figure out what's prevented them from moving forward in the past, and how can you be the one that actually helps them to move forward now.
Yeah, and that review of what have they tried to date is so important, because not only are you potentially avoiding a bombshell like, oh, well, hey, what have you tried before? Well, we tried this. Oh, hey, they already tried one of the ideas in my head, right? I should
Mm-hmm.
take that back to the team to make sure they're aware of that. But you're also expanding on the impact of their organization. So, hey, let's say they have a problem that's costed them $10,000 over the course of a year in lost payroll, and $50,000 in lost opportunities, and maybe they're 10% under their growth goal of $1 million. So they're short 100 grand. Quick math, that's $160,000 in various impacts, some harder than others.
Mm-hmm.
But if they spent a $25,000 project that took 100 hours over 3 months of a key manager's time, right? That's something different. Now you're saying, hey, it wasn't just $160,000. maybe this is a $200,000 impact, right? You've got that 25 grand and you've got 100 hours of a six-figure salary manager's time. You're probably up closer to here. And what could that manager also have been doing? Well, hey, what are you usually able to do with 100 hours of time? What's an average impact of the company?
Hmm.
And suddenly you just force multiplied the impact of that one issue by asking about previous efforts.
Yep.
Not only did you avoid the bombshell of presenting that problem back and immediately disqualifying yourself as unqualified, you could say, I mean, that might be the solution. Someone botched it up,
Hmm.
but say, hey, you did this, and here's the difference. Here's why it didn't work. And you can educate if that needs to be the solution, or if it's something, it's just one of the options where you just don't do it. You say, hey, a lot of people would probably recommend this, and I know you've already done that, so let's
Yep.
go ahead and put this in the no pile.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that comes up there too is, like you had mentioned at the beginning, I get to work with sales consultants all over the globe. And it's interesting to me how many times a customer will reach out to a sales consultant and will present them with, hey, what I'm looking for is negotiation training, or I'm looking for help, with my team when it comes to pricing or this, that, and the other. And every time I hear that in my head, I'm like, probably have a discovery issue, because if you follow those steps accordingly and you've actually help them to figure out this is how much it's costing you, and oh, by the way, what can you actually do with that money if it was actually reinvested into the right places of the business. So it's not just what the cost is that you've already expended, it's what the lost opportunity is from what that cash could have been doing if it was in the business, if it was doing other things like you had referred to with the manager. If you had that 100 hours back, what would that have meant? So especially depending on where your cost comes in relation to that, I've had customers that when it comes to the sale point and I drop the bomb on what our pricing is, and we're, as a platform, we're typically much higher than some of the other platforms from just a starting off point. And I'll mention that if I do get any pushback, which most of the time we don't, because we've already gone through that cost calculation, they know how much they're saving. And I've had some customers that are literally like, so wait a minute, this problem's costing me X and that's all you're going to charge. And it's like, yeah. So the other alternative you have is when someone pushes back, if I haven't done that discovery work, I'm really paddling up creek. Like I'm going up creek without a paddle, and I'm not going very, very far, very fast. Right. If I have done that work, then I have a leg to actually stand on to say, okay, let's appreciate the point, but let's kind of talk through that. So my understanding is our solution is going to cost you, I'll make a random number up here, 20 grand over the course of the next 12 months. And this is what's going to be invested from a time and effort perspective, blah, blah, blah. The challenge that we're looking to solve is a $200,000 problem. I'm confused, because you could work with the other guy for 15 grand because, yeah, they are less expensive than us, or 10 grand even. They are less expensive. My understanding is you've worked with other providers before and they haven't been able to solve the problem. So that 200 grand has extrapolated and become a snowball and larger and larger. I guess I'm confused why we wouldn't look to just fix the problem today.
Yeah.
Like, you have that leg to stand on if you've done that discovery. If you don't do that discovery, then you're just like everybody else trying to justify your price without any real justification other than, well, we're a better company than those guys, or we have different costs, or whatever it might be. When you do the discovery right, it covers a lot of other areas that many times people think are the problem.
The second you start talking about yourself during a sales process, you've lost.
Yep.
It's all about the customer. So looking into that third stage, again, kind of overviewing on this process, if you're following along, this is going to be on the outline steps 4 and 5, which is around, I call this value proposition, proposal, presentation, whatever you want to call it. This is around the second meeting. And so I want to highlight that piece right there. In a discovery conversation, if you have talked about a solution, you've done it wrong. Get the solutions out of discovery. You should only be asking questions. You're there to learn. During the value proposition stage, this is when you're stitching together discovery and doing that bridge that Nate had mentioned, presenting that opportunity to say, hey, here's how we're going to take you to your future state. And so, Nate, I think we we follow a similar thing. When I'm doing a value proposition, I'm coming in and I'm saying, hey, like just to review, here's what we talked about. Here's that issue. Here's the impacts it's having on your business. Here's any of those costs. It's costing us this. And the way I got that math was from the prospect. It's not my math, it's their math.
Yep.
I usually forget how to add and subtract in meetings, which I know is a favorite of yours.
I'm really crappy at math when I'm on a call.
I forget it. My phone's calculator doesn't work. I haven't installed it. I don't know.
Yep.
How do we? You add up the number. You tell me what it is. But after we've presented, hey, here's the issue. Here's the impacts. Here's those costs. Here's where you wanted to be, right? If this was fixed, 12 months, we're in sunshine and rainbow land. We look like this. I'll go point by point across the major themes that I'm talking with someone, and at the end, I'm asking a question, and that question is, Nate, do I have a good understanding of what's going on? Did I get it right? Is that a similar process to how you're following right at the top of that value proposition?
Yeah, very much so. I think I have an additional stage in between just based on the way that my process is. I do discovery, and then I usually have another meeting just because there's a lot more involved sometimes. And that's more of like a checklist process that I'm going through, right? I'm trying to better understand some of that kind of stuff. But when you get to that value proposition standpoint, that's exactly how it should be done. And the main thing that I found, like, especially when I was a sales manager and I had like 30 sales guys that reported to me, if we were going in to do a proposal, right? And I'd say to the sales rep, great, so what are we presenting to them? And they would come back with essentially the equivalent of a price quote. I remember training my team on how to actually develop a proposal, and many of the sales guys going, we don't have the information to fill into that spot. And I was like, okay, so where do you think you get that information? Like, it comes back to, if you do the proper discovery, you can go back and say, okay, my understanding, these are the core issues. Do we have that correct? Yes, we do. Great. And those core issues are causing these specific problems, these challenges, these costs, whatever that might be. Do we have that correct? Do I have your agreement on that? Yes, you do. Okay, great. And if we were to solve everything perfectly, this is where you would be at in 12 months. Do I have that accurate? Yes, you do. Great. This is what we present as a solution. It's very much it can be referred to as like a doctor frame. You're the doctor that's diagnosing, saying, this is the problem, this is what you need fixed, and this is what we present in order to solve that. We need surgery, or we need this type of pain medication, or we need this, or we need that. That's what we present as the doctor, as the authority to go in and say, this is how we solve that problem and get you to that desired end state. If you've done proper discovery, it's really easy to do. If you haven't done proper discovery, you're going to be wondering, well, how do I even come up with this information? Because you don't have it to go off of. And that's usually the biggest thing, but very, very similar in process from that perspective.
Yeah, that leading questions towards the yes. In discovery, rarely will I use what's called a close-ended question. I'm not asking yes or no. I'm saying, well, what's that mean? What's the impact? Help me understand. Help me understand, so much so that my wife literally raises the hackles on the back of her neck, and is quite upset when I'm asking that internally. So but I think if I say I'm confused one more time, I'll sleep out on the but
to jump in there just real quick, because one question that I usually ask, and you and I both know baseline selling, so this is one of those coming off a second, going to third. It's kind of that checklist. Sometimes I ask it in discovery, sometimes it's on a second meeting, just depending on how it all falls out. But one of the key questions that I'll ask is, okay, so, and it is somewhat of a closed-ended question, but I'll say, okay, so based on this information, based on these challenges, this impact, etc., scale of 1 to 10, like, how committed are you to actually moving forward with something and getting a result? Right? Because if they come back and they're like, 6, we're not going anywhere. I haven't done enough discovery. So that's kind of one of those like checkpoint questions you can ask to figure out, have I done enough to really understand that? The other component to that is, if they say they're a 9 or a 10, you know that it's like, okay, bang through the rest of the stuff. We've got what we need, provided you're with the right decision maker. But if not, I've also said that before. well, I got to get approval from my boss, or I got to get approval from this person or that person. Great. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you think they are to fix this? Those answers might be two completely different things. You may be talking to one person who's like, I'm a 10, I'm sold, we have to get this fixed. My boss, not so much. And then I can do discovery and say, great. So from that perspective, what do you feel your boss needs in order to move this from a 6 to a 9 or a 10 or whatever that might be?
And so we had a question which I answered quickly. I just want to let everyone know the recording on this will automatically publish to the email that you use to register. The platform converts this into a view on demand video, and that usually happens within 24 to 48 hours. So just to answer that publicly for everyone, you'll have that. John, I'm going to hold your question to the end, but we will answer that in the Q&A section. We just had another one come up. When it comes down to that value proposition, we just, and Nate, you did a great job at kind of like the leading questions. Do I understand? In 12 months, is this where you want to go, etc. One of my favorite questions is after the presentation of that solution, the second half of that value proposition meeting is, hey, here's this, we've got this, we have an understanding of where you are. We have an understanding on where we want to go. And I've presented this solution, which kind of touches on each little piece, like, hey, here's how we'll solve problem 1, solve problem 2, solve problem 3, get you to the desired state. We're popping champagne in 12 months. That second question that I always love to ask is, Nate, do you feel this plan would work? And that's a powerful question because it sets up the close, right? Like, hey, have we done a good enough job at stitching together? Here's where you're at. Here's where you want to go. This is the bridge that we're going to walk across together. Yep. This is how we're gonna hop the gap. How we're going to walk across the gap together. That's the key question right there. Is do you feel this plan will work? Because that last question that I'll always ask right after they say, yeah, I think the plan will work. All right, well, do you want my help?
Yep. Yeah. When you've done the discovery properly and you've done that value proposition meeting properly and you get to that point and you get a yes at, do you think this plan will work? It's that easy from a closing perspective. That's why, like I had mentioned earlier, usually a customer will come and say, this is the challenge I'm having. I've had people that are like, I need help. I need training for my sales reps on closing. And anytime they say that, I'm like, no, you don't. Like you need discovery and you need how you actually present the information that you discovered. That's what you need to have a better understanding on, because closing techniques are a dime a dozen. There's a billion of them out there. You can get books that have hundreds of closing techniques, and all of them are flawed if you don't have this information, because like you just said, Ian, when you get to that point, you say, hey, do you feel this would work? Yes. Great. Do you want my help? It's kind of right there. They're either going to give you a yes or they're going to say no, but no, I do, but I need to get some of this stuff figured out first. Can you help me with that? I need to justify this to someone else in my organization, or I need to figure out the funding or whatever it might be, right? That's really the key, but you have the ability to go into some of those next steps when you do it the right way.
Yep. You're either going to get a, yeah, send me the proposal. No, the price is wrong, which then again points back towards discovery problems.
Yep.
Or some variation of, we got to think about it. We got to think about it. And think about it's okay. A lot of people don't want to make a decision on the spot. They just need to consider or whatever. And that leads into the final step of the stage, which is just that follow up and follow through, which it's okay to have someone need to think about it. And because of time, I'll throw this out. The key thing around that stage, which we will do a session in March, the last Thursday in March, about value proposition, and we'll end up with value proposition around follow-up, follow-through. Set the next step. Hey, Nate, completely understand. You got to think about it. I do too. When you going to have your decision made by? Just wait. And then when they say, well, 2 weeks. All right, well, then let's set a meeting. How about next Friday? Since 2 weeks from today would be a Thursday. How about next Friday? Is morning or afternoon better? And schedule the appointment right there in the room.
Yep.
Go ahead and let them think about it, but don't be chasing and following up and things like that. You just have a follow up. They didn't have a decision, ask why. Maybe do another one. But if someone keeps kicking the can down the road and they're not making a decision, well, this isn't important enough for them. Maybe there is a gap in value. Maybe something else is going on. But whatever it is, there's a misfire there.
Yep.
And just get it out of the pipeline, because that's starting to be hope and not an opportunity. So management, and this is by far one of my favorite things about Membrain and what attracted me to it. But regardless of system of what you're doing, you need to be able to manage your process and make sure it's running effectively, right? How can we do that? Talk to me a little bit about analytics and about tracking the ability to win versus lose on opportunities.
Yeah, so that's something that there's some tools out there that'll do some win-loss type analytics, but in full transparency, I've dealt with a lot of different platforms and I've yet to see one. Not saying there can't be one because there's hundreds of different platforms out there, but I've yet to see one that goes in as in depth as Membrain does when it actually comes to win-loss analytics. Basically, the way that we do it is if it's not a free text form or field inside of Membrain, if it's not something that someone can just type anything willy-nilly, so it's a drop down, it's a numerical value that's provided, it's whatever, we're tracking that. And every time a sales rep marks a deal or marks an opportunity won or lost, we're reporting that back in, and then we have the ability to actually drill down into all that information. So we can look at specific reps, we can look at specific territories, you can look at it a bunch of different ways. But some of the key things we're looking at is, one, the basic demographics of the account. So size of the account, geography of the account, what specific industry they're in, those kinds of things. Those are basic, those are pretty easy. But then we look at within the actual process itself, what are the key questions that we're asking? What are the key responses that help us to know good opportunity, bad opportunity? Higher likelihood of winning, lower likelihood of winning, because then we can make adjustments within our sales process of either making sure we ask those questions every single time, or we can go back and say, hey, based on what we're discovering here, our win rate when we find out that it's this particular competitor that we have, or when it's this specific problem that they're facing, our win rate drops by a significant amount. So we either as a management team have to figure out how do we solve for that so our sales team can win more, or as a salesperson, you look at it and you go, we don't have a solve for that. It's a weak point within our business, and I'm going to move on to a better opportunity because my likelihood of winning that is so low, right? We go back to the time management for the actual salesperson themselves. A good salesperson is always going to be thinking about how they get the most out of their return on effort and return on time from an investment perspective into opportunities.
Yeah, making sure that you're tracking that. And so one of the things that I started doing when it came to analytic management is I went through, and when I started doing this, hey, look, it's all big free form blocks. And a couple of revisions ago in my instance of Membrain, again, insert your CRM here, but I would have big free-form blocks where I'm capturing discovery answers. And then after doing 10, 15 of those, I just pulled up the results and said, all right, what was this result? What was that result? What was this result? And I look for ways to simplify big blocks of text, phrases. And then when I have 5 or 6 phrases and those are the common themes, I've got a drop down. And maybe it's a multi-select. Maybe it's this phrase and this phrase, or this phrase or this phrase, right? It could be a and or an or whatever. But once you're able to get a lot of your discovery topics into lists where you're selecting one or more results of those lists, you can be doing analytics against everything.
Yep.
And then when you have enough data and you've had enough at-bats that those analytics bubble up, it goes away from data and it goes into trend analysis. And when you have trend analysis, you can start pivoting.
Yep.
And you can message to it and everything. And then full circle, give that back to marketing, and suddenly you've got a winning combination where people are beating down the doors.
Yep. Well, and the other component that comes into that as well is you can find out that sometimes it's not just one issue, but your win rate goes up when you actually identified 3 issues or 4 issues. But you can figure out what is that kind of tipping point for the customer that puts them over the edge. And when you find that out, that can be feedback to your sales team to say, hey, if you've only discovered 1 issue, we don't have enough here. Your win rate, your sales cycle time is going to be 10 times longer than it usually is. We need to go back and discover more potential challenges that they have. Because if you get up to 2 or 3, this is how it accelerates it. And then when a good sales rep understands that, they're happy to sit and dig in and figure all that additional stuff out because they know how much more they're going to be able to close from that perspective. But when you don't have those analytics, everybody's just kind of shooting from the hip. When you have those analytics, you can actually systematize that process and make it repetitive, iterate on it, improve, iterate on it, improve, and eventually get it to the point where it's a machine that just goes through.
Yeah. And that's a good bit of feedback there. You're not writing process in stone when it comes to sales. This is written on a sheet of paper in pencil because you're going to be scratching things out. You're going to be erasing. You're going to be changing words. You should plan on modifying and editing your process. And so cycling through here, I want to take a little moment. We've been mentioning this kind of throughout, but Nate, why don't you take 2 seconds and tell us what Membrain is, and then I'm going to explain this huge amount of text that I just threw up on the screen. But give us a 60-second rundown on what Membrain is and what it can do for people.
Yeah, so quick 60 seconds. Membrain is our purpose, our mission is to elevate the sales profession. So Membrain isn't just a CRM platform. We're more of a sales enablement tool that's actually designed so that you can build in prospecting processes, sales processes that would actually be in your pipeline itself, account growth, key account management, those kind of processes, so that you can actually document, iterate, and improve those processes and make them a standard operating procedure for your business. Many companies have that in various different areas. You wouldn't go into finance and not have standard operating procedures in place and just do it willy-nilly. You wouldn't go into how you deliver your services and just do it willy-nilly. Sales, for whatever reason, we allow people to shoot from the hip all the time. So Membrain is there to help document that process, make sure it's executable, put the guidance and the training into the actual system itself, so you can have video guidance, text guidance, all that kind of stuff for the salesperson as they're looking at the steps, so they're never lost, they're never confused, and really be able to iterate and execute on that process.
Yeah, and that ability to edit processes based off of what you got. This is, if you think about coding, right? And Nate, you shared this analogy that really all of us are familiar with software, right? And that software, hey, it'll come out in code, and then something goes wrong. You need a new feature, or there's a bug, or whatever. There's something in there. You can go into that back end. You can edit the code, and then you start getting a different output. But the big thing is that with code, if I type in X, I'm going to get Y. And that's because of code. Every time I type in X, I'm going to get Y. And if you treat sales as a process, if you treat it as a code, and it takes a while to get it right, you put in X, Y, Z, and you're going to get out 1, 2, 3. Now, there's exceptions and variables and stuff like that because life is the way that is. But that's the whole point of instituting process into sales, is that what's that do? It takes opportunity to business. That's the input, that's the output, and the process is that code. That's what makes the funnel go through. And so you'll notice 2 links on here, just to give an aside. One's a full link. I know that we got cybersecurity folks on here, and there's a short URL at the top. Okay, I am giving my word that I created that short URL at 10:30 this morning from the bottom link. You can copy either one of them in there, but I wanted to give a short one because this big one's super long. But this is for anyone who's on this webinar. If you go to that link and you click on and you enter it in, you fill out that form, you'll get a trial of Membrain, and you'll have the full access to the tool instead of a limited trial, which only gives you one piece. So you can not take my word for it. You can go to membrain.com and sign up for your own, but you're only going to get one part of it. This way you'll get a full suite trial of the tool and be able to play. And you might have noticed on the side that there was a pop-up for, hey, like, schedule a process review. If you'd like to, sign up for a version of Membrain, sign up for that 90 minutes with me, and I'll walk you through our instance with our process and see if that could work for you. And if it will, you let me know, I'll ping Nate, and we'll get that loaded up into your instance for you so that you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. You've got something, or you've got some tools to start using right now today. That's the offer for coming to the webinar. So Nate, and really quickly, everyone, I want to prompt this out. There's that handout there under the handout sections that does have that process details. No matter what, please grab that. I hope it's helpful. We do have 2 more sessions on the books for those of you who are interested and want to talk further on February 23rd at 11:30 to 12:30 Eastern. We're diving deep into discovery. If you were hearing discovery and saying, "Man, that sounds like my issue. That sounds really important. I'd like to do that." Hop in. There is a huge meaty process that I have around discovery in there that we're sharing and diving deep into. And then on March 30th, the last Thursday of March, 11:30 to 12:30 Eastern, we're diving into value proposition, that bridging the gap. So we've got some time for questions. If you have questions, throw them out here. I've got one here from John. John, you're mentioning that you're a smaller organization. You've got a handful of clients on a tiered package. For your size of company, what would you suggest works best? Block hours, tiered packages, all you can eat? I would say that kind of depends. You're looking into offer structure, which is a little bit out of there. But what I would do is I would go to your existing customers that you have, and I would have a structured conversation with them. I'd say, "Hey, I'm trying to grow my business. I want to make sure I service you well. You're the folks who have brought me here today. Can I ask you some questions about your experience?" Ask them what they like about working with you. Ask them what could be better. What they like is the stuff you want to make sure you don't mess up, right? Like that's your value prop right there. That's the basis of a value prop. Things that could be better is your business process improvement hit list. And if you've got 10 customers and 8 of them say this could be better, congratulations, that's number one, right? So look for the patterns and trends amongst the responses. But then the key question that I think might give you some insight is, hey, why did you buy? So why did you choose to buy from us instead of someone else? And really dive into those responses. These meetings I usually try to book 30 to 45 minutes for, but if you can get an hour out of people, that's even better. And dive into that response. And again, you're don't take one person's word as gospel. Look at the base of your clients, get as many of those conversations as you can, and then look for some trends. And that plus the reason why they like you, what you're doing well, those 2 things should probably form and give enough insight into what you should be positioning as your service. When it comes to how you bill it, man, that's just how you bill it. That's a numbers problem. Look at your costs. Look at your cost of goods sold. Look at your expenses. Make sure that you've got enough revenue on top of those, plus a little bit of float. You want the cheat in case something weird happens on pricing or whatever. So if you want 30 points of margin, or a 30% margin, and you've got $70 of combined costs, well, then you're going to need to have something on top of there to get your rate up to 100, 105 or whatever. So you've got that margin plus your cheat. So it's just math, and you're kind of reverse engineering math on there, but focus on profit first. What do you need to make off of every whatever? And if that's a user thing or a widget or an account or whatever, what's the figure that you need to make off of that, and then work backward from there with inputs. I hope that helps. If you have a follow-up, go ahead and throw it out. Anything to add on that, Nate, from your end? There was it's an interesting packaging question, which is a little outside of scope, but any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think I would kind of double down on what you said from the perspective of go and do, like, we would call it a win-loss review with the customer, right? So do a debrief with the customer and figure out why it is that they move forward with you. But that's actually a good habit for everybody to be into. Maybe not every customer as you grow and you get bigger, but go back and do that with your customers, because you may be thinking in your head, this is why I won or this is why I lost. And the customer may give you a completely different answer. So the question that you also have to ask at that point is that what I want my business to be known for? Yes or no? For instance, if the customer comes back and says, yeah, I went with you because you were the lowest cost provider. Great. Is that what I want my business built around? Or do I need to figure out the shifts I need to make in my business so that I can create more value? If that is the direction that you want to go, fantastic. You know you're doing the right things, but make sure that you have that feedback from the customer and then make sure it aligns with the direction you're trying to go in business as well.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 seconds left. So everybody, I want to say thank you for coming in and tuning in. Nate, hey, thank you for joining. Final word, 3 seconds.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Process is your silver bullet.